Well, welcome back. This is our final installment of our Home Again series. And I wanted to revisit that last scene of our modern day representation of the prodigal son, and it was the story of him coming home. And where in the story that Jesus tells, there's a fattened calf. Last week it was just pizza and friends.
Yeah.
But yet there was still a celebration. So here's the question: what's the biggest celebration? Who throws the best parties? When you think about if I had to celebrate something, who would I celebrate with? What would it look like? And so we'll start with you, Luke. What's the biggest celebration you can remember being caught up in?
Well, I just know, so growing up in Huntsville, the party city that it is, we had a Mr. Gaddy's. And so if you got an invitation in the mail
yeah.
inviting you to a party at Mr.
Yeah.
Gaddy's, you knew it was a big deal. It was a celebration for the decades, right? You knew you were going home with some sort of prize.
For us, it was the McDonald's party with the McDonald's playground.
Yeah.
That was a big player in my first grade. If you had your party there, because there was a special McDonald's cake, there was even a clown that would come out, which
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
yeah, but that was a
Now.
big. Yeah. Now you got to do like bounce houses and ponies, and go to a flip place and do all the
Yeah.
fun things. Okay, what else? What are some of the biggest celebrations you remember, Leah?
I know. I was in my friend's wedding, and it was in New York at one of Mark Twain's mansions, and it was probably the best party I've ever been
Yeah.
to. It was just beautiful, and it had, hors d'oeuvres, and then a dinner, and then dessert, and then just
You felt
Amazing.
special for being there.
yes, and it had like an 8-piece band. Also, it was awesome.
That's pretty great. What I noticed is, I hate to say this, but different cultures party way better than we do.
Yes.
Church of Christ folks are not known for their parties. If you say, what do Church of Christ people do? We sing really well. We throw a good potluck. But as far as the blowout parties, and I'm thinking especially wedding receptions, I think I mentioned this in one of our previous discussions, that Church of Christ people go to a wedding reception, they cut the cake and they go home. But we were able to go to, I was actually singing at this wedding of a friend, that their heritage was Greek. And so it was a Greek person with marrying just a regular white person, boring white people, and but the entire wedding party learned the Greek dances.
Oh, fun.
And like you said, it was like well catered. There was like 7 different stations that you could go to with different food, and we left the reception well after midnight. And nobody wanted to leave, And I've been at wedding receptions where you're there about 45 minutes and you're already looking at your watch, like, where's the coffee? Where's the mints? Let's get out of here. What about occasions? What are some of the occasions that you think of that people just really get excited? I'm thinking about Super Bowl parties. A lot of times around sports events. Can you remember
Yeah.
some sports events that were big celebrations for you?
Yeah, I mean, when the Astros in 2005, that was a big event. Anytime there's like a World Cup and the USA is involved or not involved, it's always something like that. Playoffs.
But soccer, there's another great cultural
Yeah.
soccer matches.
Yeah.
World football, they call it.
Football.
They really celebrate. There's some in the Indian culture where their weddings last 3 days to a week. Can you imagine? Rhonda, I was talking about my best 30th birthday. Just had one, but the best party we ever threw. Rhonda threw this for me, and it was all church people. It was like people that I'd grown up with. It was this whole mix of folks, and I remember some of the church ladies asking Rhonda, "Well, it says this is 4 hours. Like, what are we going to do for 4 hours?" And yet we had karaoke, and we had some people playing live music, and we sang, and we played games. And it was the church people that didn't want to leave. They were the ones we had to kind of broom out of there and be like, all right, you got to go home. But there's something about learning how to celebrate. And tonight we want to watch just a short clip. This is a real true story, a testimony, if you will, of a prodigal son. And we'll come back right after it, and we'll have some more discussions about celebrations.
I just got really frustrated with school. I I felt so much pressure with my dad wanting me to do well in school, and I've never been natural at school. I've never made great grades. So my dad was at a meeting at my school with my teachers and found out that I'd been lying about all my schoolwork, saying that I've been getting it all done. And there was a project that I just didn't do, and he found out about that because I told him I did do it. And while they were gone, I just was at that point where I just had to, I realized that I just had to go because I was afraid of him coming home and yelling at me. I was afraid of what was going to happen.
Well, Judy and I got home about 7:30, I guess, and my car was gone, which was odd because Mike didn't have a driver's license. He had a learner's permit. So I called a friend of his and I got him on the phone, and he told me that Mike had actually talked about running away.
So I was at this period in my life where I was really questioning God's existence just because of all the stresses that I felt like he was putting me through. So as I was going out there, the whole time I was just praying that God would reveal himself to me, whether that be in a car accident or whether I got pulled over.
And it was really scary and depressing, and we wanted to just be able to say to Mike, it's okay, just come home. We called the principal of his high school, and he talked to some of Mike's friends. They thought that he was going to New York City. So it was a pretty devastating day for the family. We had friends coming over to pray with us, and David Thompson actually talked to me, and he asked if I wanted to go to New York. I was like, well, I know I got to do something.
So I got to New York the next morning. I got out of my car and I was walking around, and I found myself in Times Square, and it was about 10 o'clock, and I walked around the whole day, and that whole day I was still just praying that God would show himself to me. I brought my Bible, I was reading that. So
we drove into New York, and it's like midnight, 11:45, and so we split up on two different sides of the street. And as we're walking and getting closer and closer to Times Square, there's more and more people, and there's crowds, so I'm stopping on my side and looking, through the faces of the crowd, and I think David's doing that on his side, and I just felt like there is really no hope that we're gonna find him.
Around midnight, I was hungry, so I went to the McDonald's in Times Square. I got some food and I sat down, and while I was eating it, I stayed there for quite a while because I was trying to figure out where I was gonna go. And as I was eating, I see David Thompson walk in through the doors of the McDonald's, and he just looks at me and he breaks down, and he comes over and hugs me, and he's saying, "Oh, Mike."
And right about then, my phone rang, and it was David. And I answered, and he said, "I'm with him." We're sitting in McDonald's across the street. That whole day, I had been thinking about the story of the Prodigal Son. And so I took his Bible from him there in the McDonald's, and I turned to Luke 15, and I told him, "Mike, this is what I've been thinking about all day." And I was just trying to tell Mike that all that mattered was that we were together again.
So thinking back to that moment where my dad walked through that door, and I saw how much he cared about me and that he forgave me, that gives me a great picture of how much God cares about me and how much he forgives. And I know that whatever I do, that he still has forgiveness for me, and that I can just rest in that.
Luke, let's talk a little bit about this young man and the reaction of his father and whoever David Thompson is. We're not sure who David Thompson was, but he played a big role.
He was a big deal.
He was a big deal. What's the father's reaction to his son?
I mean, it's that immediate, I gotta go find him, right?
Yeah.
He's lost, he's gone. And you don't see so much anger as so much just a sense of, I've lost something that I need to find quickly.
And the son is pretty undone by that. He can't believe, You know, when he says, and I took my son's Bible from him, and I'm like, and you beat him, right? You
Right.
just beat him over the head and said, don't you ever go to New York City by yourself again. He's like, no, I showed him this story, and it was the story of the prodigal son. Hence, but I want to talk about that celebration. About okay, you did a little digging. You did a little bit of study into the robe, the fattened calf, the ring, and the pizza.
Yeah. So I just thought it was really interesting when it talks about the robe. You don't really think about how all of these have actually been used at different points in Scripture, because it is an old parable, like you said. It's an older parable with a new twist that Jesus adds to it. And so this idea of the robe, and immediately the son saying, bring him a robe, is that immediate, will you again automatically reclaim your sonship with me? Yeah. You are not taken back as a slave, as a servant. I want everyone to know you are back as my son.
So where else in Scripture do we see the giving of the robe to signify placement?
With Jacob and Esau.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we see that Jacob is now given, it's called the choice cloth, is what it's called there. But it's taken from Esau and given to Jacob, saying, you now take over this inheritance that usually goes to the oldest son, but now Jacob is claiming that inheritance.
Think about Jacob giving that coat of many colors then to Joseph, skipping over all kinds of of traditions to say, this is my favored son. Right. The robe of Christ, the robe that's placed on him at the crucifixion, right? That's done to mock. What about the ring?
Yeah, so the ring, again, we see it throughout Scripture. We see it when Pharaoh gives it to Joseph when he appoints him as an officer in Egypt. He gives him his insignia ring. We see it in Esther when the king gives it to Mordecai, again showing affection for Mordecai, speaking up and basically saving this plot to kill the king. And so it's again a sign of affection, but also this authority that's now been given to the son again.
I have a friend who wrote a wonderful article years ago about lost things, and she makes this same point. I'm going to read it in her words, but she says, I remember being at Point Leo with Mike about 2 years ago. We had a picnic and sat on the beach talking about life and love, our hopes and dreams, when I realized that the Russian wedding ring I always wore wasn't on my finger. I look back on it now, and it all seems very trivial. But at the time, the level of panic at the thought of having lost such a special thing, such a special gift to me, was unbearable. For the next panic-stricken 45 minutes, I had Mike retracing our steps on the beach, searching earnestly for my silver ring. And of course, it wasn't until I got home that I found my ring sitting on the bathroom bench. I was so excited to have my ring. Although I didn't call my neighbors in for a celebration, I remember the feeling of joy and relief, when in the end was short-lived because during our frantic search, on the beach, Mike had gotten sunburnt, dehydrated, and was suffering from heat stroke. Way to go. I'm sure we have all these stories of times when we have lost something of great worth and then found it. Of course, in the grander scale of things, losing my ring was hardly earth-shattering. Other losses, I love how she says this, other losses in life are much more significant, and the searching may be heartbreaking. The loss of life, the deterioration of the health of a loved one, the loss of employment, war, suffering, loss of innocence, loss of relationship, loss of peace, so much loss, desperate searching, and often little celebration or rejoicing in the outcome. Leah? Okay, so Leah, let me ask the question again. Have you ever lost something what would it feel like to lose something like that? What's she feeling when she writes this?
Well, I have actually a very similar story. In the process of moving to our current house, I misplaced my wedding ring. Because at the time I was pregnant and I couldn't wear it, much like now. And so I could not find it. And I thought I'd put it in a safe. I thought I'd put it somewhere else. And I looked everywhere. And finally, I found it in a bag of baby clothes that I had set aside. Because I thought, surely I'm going to unpack this first. And it was fine. But it took me hours of thinking I lost this very precious thing to me, and significant in my marriage. So I was very happy and very exhausted once I found it.
All three stories that Jesus tells, the story of lost things, there's a party at the end. Rejoice with me. And the father tells the older son, we've got to rejoice. What was lost was found. What was dead was now alive. And Jesus even says it this way. He says, let me assure you that I love how one translation says that the angels party over each wayward person who turns their life back to God. And then one commentator writes, how can this not be good news? This would have been good news for the sinners gathered at Jesus' table that day, and it's indeed good news for those of us in need of trusting God again, of recommitting to the life of discipleship, of letting go of the things that hold us back from receiving his warm embrace. God searches for us, traveling through fields and valleys. God searches for us relentlessly in the dark, quiet places, longing to have that human-shaped hole in God's heart filled. This is the God who searches for you. I think that is probably the prevailing theme that I carry with me from that story, is that God is the one who searches. He's the one that's roaming the hillside. He's the one that's sweeping the house clean. But then I want to talk, just want to kind of finish with this idea of celebration, and what is Jesus getting at here by telling these stories that all have celebration in them, but he's also telling this story. You remember kind of the framework story is he's where?
Right.
He's at a table with sinners and tax collectors, and they're going, well, what are you doing? So what's the significance there, Luke, that, like, what is Jesus saying about the lost and who's in and who's out and who we're celebrating over?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the question we asked week one is, well, who do you see yourself at? Where do you identify? Because for so many of these people, they're hearing this celebration story, and in their entire, it's just like cannot compute. Why is there a celebration? And then he even goes back, and the parable brings, like we just saw, stuff from Old Testament, right? The rings being given, the cloth being given. So they're thinking, okay, why is he receiving a cloth? Why is he receiving a ring? Why? And I think it's to say, well, here, ask me those questions. I think that the whole part of the celebration was, this is going to confuse you, and I'm doing it on purpose because I want you to dive deeper with
So
this.
he's creating some tension to say, who do you think's invited to the table?
Right.
And also there's some tension here of, don't be like the older son and refuse to come in just because you're bitter,
Right.
because you tried to earn your way into the kingdom. I want to talk just a little bit, and we won't develop this for too long, but all throughout the Old Testament, the prophecies of the Messiah included this idea that when Messiah comes, he was bringing wine with him. And that makes us somewhat uncomfortable. Some more than others. What do you think they were trying to say with Jesus is bringing the good wine? What do you think that means, Leah?
I think it means that, it's going to be a celebration unlike you've never seen before. Like, it's going to be something on a totally different level, because he is going to bring the party with him, literally. With the good wine, with everything. Like, he is the reason for us to celebrate.
Yes. And I think wine also signifies this idea of abundance.
Yes.
That you're not growing crops just to feed your family, just to stay alive. You've got enough
Sign of wealth.
to ferment. You've got extra. The prophecies really go a long way to say it's not just a bowl full of wine, it's a bath full of wine, several baths fulls of wine. It's a vat of wine that you can swim in. But I think it's no wonder then that Jesus spends his time on earth kind of partying. And I know that term has some baggage to it, but he really does. He spends his time eating and drinking. The story in John 2 of him turning this water into wine is significant for a lot of different reasons, but it's also establishing, as John does throughout his gospel, it's establishing the messiahship of Jesus. That when they heard new wine, no one puts old wine into new wine into old wineskins. Some heads came up and said, "Oh, he's talking about Messiah." Jesus feeds. Think of some of the meal. He feeds the 5,000 and the 4,000. He eats with Lazarus. There's this great banquet that happens after he raises Lazarus from the dead. You wouldn't do it during. And there's the Last Supper. There's the fact that he's accused, we talked about this in weeks before, of being a wine bibber and a glutton. But I think I want to end on this. there's this line in Mark chapter 2, and they ask him, well, why is it, John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not? This is a major deal here. And Jesus looks at them and says, how could the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? And that's a great question for us too. Is can we, in the presence of Jesus, not be the one throwing the biggest parties, not having the biggest celebrations? Our baptisms should be epic, right? Our celebrations on Sunday should be loud and even raucous, because we are claiming once again that we've gone from being dead to being alive, from being lost to being found. Any kind of final thoughts? You got one last word maybe about this parable, about this story? It's been a great study. I've kind of uncovered some things that I hadn't thought about before. Well, what about for you guys? What's a final thought?
Leah.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is just, especially when you aren't feeling especially spiritual at any point in your life, to realize that God is still pursuing you actively, and that all you need to do is focus on that and turn your heart toward that, and you are going to feel and be so much better in your spiritual walk and in life in general.
To look for the God that's looking for you.
Yes.
That's a great point. Some points of discussion, and I'll ask you guys that too. You might talk about, if you could have any major celebration, what would it be? What would it look like? Where would you go? It might, for my boys, it would be, I think, the Nerf place where you could shoot Nerf guns at each other. But if you could go anywhere and just celebrate, where would you go? And what would you celebrate? And not just birthdays or Christmas or something like that, but if you could celebrate something, what would you celebrate? I often thought of, what will the celebrations look like when we can gather back together? I hope we throw the biggest potluck and it gets wild, like major banana cream, pudding. I mean, we get after it. What else? What are some other points of conversation here? I love the idea. What does it make you feel that God is pursuing you, that he goes after your heart? Maybe one or two more questions for discussion.
I think going back from the son who doesn't want to stay in the relationship and feels like deeds are all that has to be done to complete the good work, to play catch up for the sinners of the world, right? Yeah. I think it's where are you at with your relationship? Are you checking other people's relationships with God more, or are you checking your own?
And I think that final question of who are you in the story, you've heard it now, you've heard it 5 times, and who are you, and who would you react? How would you react if you were that person? And I've said it before, I've been all the people in the story at one time or another in my life. So you might reflect on that as well. We hope you have a great discussion. We're going to start a new series next week. Can't wait to tell you all about it. God bless. We'll see you next time.